Welcome back, GED scholars, to another Reasoning Through Language Arts exam video. And in this video, we are continuing on with grammar and language, but in this video specifically, we are going to review writing effective sentences. And so we are going to look at simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. And if you haven't already watched the video on noun and verb agreements, please do so, because you have to remember that in order to just get a simple sentence, you need to make sure to have a noun and a verb. Well, your verb has to match your noun, or your noun has to match your verb. So make sure you understand that concept before you jump into this video, where we're going to talk about actually writing these effective sentences. Not only will this help you on the multiple choice portion of the RLA exam, where you're going to be basically editing the sentences that they provide, but this is also going to help you out when it comes to the Reasoning Through Language Arts extended writing response. Please remember, you're going to need to write an essay for this test in order to pass. Please make sure you pay attention to writing effective sentences, how to create and how to edit simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. So first up, simple sentences. And for those of you who've watched the other RLA videos where we talked about nouns and verbs, we talked about pronouns, you know from that video that a simple sentence requires you to have a noun and a verb. The noun can also be called the subject. So I don't want you to see subject and not know that that's another way we can refer to that noun. But if your sentence has a noun and a verb, like a sentence that reads, John ran, that's a perfectly legit sentence, folks. Is it the best sentence for someone who's getting their GED to write when it comes to the writing response? No, but this sentence, John ran, is perfectly fine because it has a noun and a verb. Well, when it comes to simple sentences, notice that you need to have a subject or a noun, the verb, and we're including an object, folks. And for those of you who, once again, you've watched the other RLA videos, you know that the object, as it says right here in this bullet point, is the person or thing affected by the action described in the verb. What I like to say is that the object is on the receiving end of that verb. And so, for example, if you have a sentence that says, Sally gave a book to Mark. Well, what's my subject or what's my noun? And you can see here, if you need a little refresher, subject noun is who is completing the verb, what or whom the sentence is about, and where, like we have right here, we have nouns. So when I see this example up here, Sally gave a book to Mark. Well, I know I have a proper noun with Sally, I have a proper noun with Mark, but who is the subject of this sentence? It's Sally. Sally is the subject of this sentence. So what is the verb that she is completing? She's giving, right? Gave is my verb right here. Well, what did she give? She gave a book. And to whom did she give? She gave it to Mark. So you have two objects on the receiving end of this verb gave. Now, we're not going to go into the details of a direct object or an indirect object. All we need to know is that this simple sentence has an object. It has two. The direct object is the direct receiver of this verb gave. Gave what? A book. So that is my direct object. And then it says to Mark. Mark is my indirect object, because Mark is still on the receiving end of that verb. It's just that the book is closer to the receiving end. And I'm not saying that because book is written closer to gave, but it's just when you read that sentence, if it read Sally gave Mark a book is still going to be that direct object. Like in relation to the actual giving, the book is what is traveling towards Mark when Sally decides to give him that book. Hopefully that makes sense. You're able to imagine that in your mind. If you can, if you're like, I need you to explain it again, please leave a comment below and I'll create another video to kind of explain that concept of direct and indirect objects. So once again, simple sentences, you need to make sure you have a subject, also known as a noun, verb, and they have to match, folks. You have to make sure your subject and your verb match. Please watch the video that we have when we're talking about verb tenses if you are struggling with subject-verb agreements. And also make sure that you are including the object in your sentence so it doesn't turn out to be a simple, I wrote it when I was in grade school sentence like we see up here with John ran. One more thing I want you to make sure you know about simple sentences is that simple sentences are considered to be independent clauses, which means that they can stand on their own because they express a complete thought in both context and meaning. So that means that when someone reads your simple sentence, because it has all the parts that we need, like we see down here in the example, where there's a noun, there is a verb. So when you write your simple sentence, it's also known as an independent clause because, like I said, it has all the parts it needs. It's in the right order, and therefore it shares with the reader a complete thought. So for this example, we see the student passed the test. That is a sentence that makes sense. You can see that happening in your mind. A student coming out of the testing center, with a smile on their face, the student passed the test. It is a complete thought in both context and meaning. Also notice that not only does it have the noun and a verb, but it has that direct object. I know I told you earlier, you don't need to worry about the direct object versus the indirect object. No, folks, you don't, because when it comes to the multiple choice portion of the exam, they're not going to give you a sentence and then ask you what's the direct object. They're going to ask you to correct the grammar in a sentence. Maybe one of those words is the object, but they're not going to come up and say, hey, when you read this sentence, the student passed the test. What is the direct object of that word? So just make sure when you are writing your simple sentences that when you read it, it makes sense. If somebody else reads it, it also makes sense. If you're like, I don't have anybody to read my sentences when it comes to practicing for the essay portion of this exam, make sure you watch the video I have where you can use ChatGPT to be your editor when it comes to helping you practice for that portion of the exam. Next up, let's look at compound sentences. So a compound sentence contains more than one independent clause. And remember, an independent clause is our simple sentence. And our simple sentence has two definite parts, but because we're adults and we are writing sentences at adult level, we need to make sure not only do we have the noun, the verb, but we're also going to attach that object to the sentence as well. With that compound sentence, because we have more than one independent clause, and usually a compound sentence is two independent clauses brought together, we need to join them with a comma, which is one of the 9 reasons we use the comma, and a logical coordinating conjunction. The fact that it has to be logical is really important, and we'll look at that concept in a moment with an example. But when it comes to coordinating conjunction, folks, some of you might have heard me in other videos refer to the acronym fanboys. And the acronym stands for, the first one, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And notice to the right, I've given you the relationship between ideas, which is basically allowing you to understand when you would use these coordinating conjunctions. So if you're like, well, do I need to memorize this short list? Absolutely, folks. You need to know these coordinating conjunctions, use the acronym to help you not only remember each one of them, but also you need to make sure you understand that the relationship it shows you between the two different sentences that you're bringing together. You cannot use whichever one of these coordinating conjunctions you want to. Not all of them will be correct when it comes to creating a compound sentence. So let's look at an example and let's look at how we could test out the different coordinating conjunctions to see if our compound sentence will make sense logically. Because remember, we have two independent clauses. Both of these, the student passed the test and she applied for college, are simple sentences. They have all their parts. We have a noun, verb, objects on both sides. So we want to bring these two together to create the compound sentence. You want to make sure you understand that you can't just use whichever coordinating conjunction you want and then think that using that coordinating conjunction, bringing those two sentences together will make sense. So let's go ahead and test out each one of these for our example and see which one makes sense and which one does not. So first and foremost, I'm going to add my comma. The comma has to come after that first independent clause before the coordinating conjunction. So let's try for. Well, what does it tell us the word for gives that relationship? Well, it shows a cause. Already I'm a little suspicious because she applied for college is not a cause, it's an effect of her passing the test. So I kind of have an idea it's not going to work, but let's try it out. The student passed the test before she applied for college. Yeah, that doesn't make sense, folks. Once again, she applied for college is not the cause, it's the effect of her passing the test. Let's try and. Well, and tells us that it joins two equally important ideas. I think and would be one of the words that we could use, but let's try it out. The student passed the test and she applied for college. Yeah, definitely and is going to stay. It is one of the words that we could use. If you're like, wait, is there more than one I could use to make this compound sentence sound logical? Absolutely, folks. Don't think that there's only one of these that would work for this example. There's going to be another one too. Don't worry. But for the most part, you just need to make sure that whichever coordinating conjunction you decide to use shows the proper relationship between those two sentences, those two ideas. So let's try nor. So nor says give no choice. Nor is considered the negative or. Well, I already know there's a choice right here. She's going to college. I don't even need to add this into the example to know it's not going to work. So I'm going to cross out nor. Next up, but says contrast two ideas. Well, I'm not trying to contrast two ideas. So contrast means to find the differences between them. And even if we added it in, it wouldn't read properly. The student passed the test, but she applied for college. No, but doesn't work either. The relationship between the ideas is not trying to show a contrast. Let's look at or. The student passed the test or she applied for college. No, because this is more of a cause and effect compound sentence. We want to show that she passed the test and then she applied for college. Or is saying you have to do one or the other. Either you're going to pass the test or she's going to apply for college. And that's not how the sentences are structured as the independent clauses that they are. So or does not work it for this either. Let's go down to yet. Notice yet shows the same relationship that but showed, where it says contrast two ideas. So if but didn't work, yet is not going to work. Last one, so. Show an effect. Ooh, I like that one because remember, she applied for college is the effect of her passing the test. So let's try this one. The student passed the test, so she applied for college. Yes, absolutely. I like so. So is probably the best one. We also have and, which and is saying it's going to share two equally important ideas, which both of them are. They're equally important. However, when we use so, it shows that this compound sentence, these two independent clauses being brought together, are showing that cause and the effect. So out of the two, I would go with so, but if you were to write and you used and, that is perfectly acceptable as well to create this compound sentence. Next up, complex sentences. So as you can see, complex sentences contain an independent clause and a subordinate clause, also known as the dependent clause. So when we have a complex sentence with that independent clause, it can stand on its own. And then we have that subordinate clause. Well, the subordinate clause has a subject and a verb, but it does not express a complete thought. It is considered a sentence fragment. For those of you who remember the days of being in school, if you ever wrote a sentence and your teacher said, hey, that's a sentence fragment, it's not a complete thought, it would be considered a dependent clause. And so these dependent clauses or these subordinate clauses start with a subordinating conjunction, and a subordinating conjunction is going to show that relationship between the independent clause and the subordinate clause. And if you're like, wait, didn't we just do that with the coordinating conjunctions? Yes, folks. And now we're talking about subordinating conjunctions, which for some of you, I know sounds like a lot, but in reality, folks, remember, you learn something, you need to just make sure that you are practicing the skill. Go online, find free videos, find something that you can do at no cost, or you can always purchase a GED study guide, and they will have a number of examples for you to look at to get a better concept or a better understanding of coordinating conjunctions. Those are fanboys. Remember, coordinating conjunction are going to bring two simple sentences, complete thoughts, though, together. When we have that complex sentence, a subordinating conjunction is actually going to start off a dependent clause. So what I mean by that is these are subordinating conjunctions. And so each one of these you could use at the beginning of a sentence. You could drop it at the beginning of a perfectly good, simple sentence. And what it ends up doing is it takes that perfectly good, simple sentence and it turns it into a dependent clause. And remember, a dependent clause cannot stand on its own. It is not a complete thought. And so when we have these complex sentences and we have one independent clause stands on its own, the second sentence that is in there can't stand on its own. And that's all because a subordinating conjunction was introduced into that complex sentence. So say, for example, we have Carla ran for the bus. She's running late, so she ran for the bus. And that is a perfectly good, simple sentence. I have my noun, I have my verb, I have my object right here. It can stand on its own. However, if all of a sudden I decide to add a subordinating conjunction before Carla ran the bus, it's going to turn it into a dependent clause. So say, for example, if I say, after Carla ran for the bus. So go ahead and read that out loud to yourself. After Carla ran for the bus. Don't you kind of sit there and think, well, what happened after she ran for the bus? You just made a dependent clause. You just made a subordinating clause. This cannot stand on its own. It is not a complete thought. Your reader is going to sit there scratching their head wondering, well, what happened after Carla ran for the bus? And we would have to complete that by adding a comma, and we're going to see the rule about dependent clause, independent clause, complex sentences, and the comma. But I need to now introduce the rest of this thought with an independent clause. So what happened after Carla ran for the bus? She missed it. She missed it is a perfectly legit, simple sentence. Here is my noun, she. Here is my verb, miss. What is my object? It. It is referring back to that bus. So after Carla ran for the bus, dependent clause cannot stand on its own. She missed it, introducing the independent clause with the dependent, making sure to include that comma. Now I have a complex sentence. And because all the parts of my complex sentence are in place, this is a perfectly legit sentence on its own. It is a great complex sentence. And folks, you want to make sure when you're writing your essay, you have simple sentences, you have compound sentences, and you have complex sentences. When it comes to complex sentences, because we are bringing together an independent clause and a dependent clause, there are rules when it comes to using the comma. Remember, when you made a compound sentence and you were joining two simple sentences with coordinating conjunction, remember your coordinating conjunction, fanboys, you need to study them. We also included a comma. So the same is true for a complex sentence when the dependent clause begins the complex sentence and then is followed by an independent clause. Like the example we just saw where Carla was running for the bus, because my dependent clause started off the complex sentence, and let's go ahead and write that complex sentence again on the screen. Started with that dependent clause after Carla ran for the bus. Remember, you can't just write that. That is a sentence fragment. Your reader is scratching their head thinking, well, what happened after she ran for the bus? So that's why we introduced the independent clause and we made sure to separate that with that comma. So the rule is when your dependent clause leads the complex sentence, you need to make sure you have a comma and then you introduce the independent clause. So if you're like, well, what if the independent clause starts off the sentence and then the dependent clause? You don't need a comma, folks. So if the sentence that we have, Carla missed the bus after she ran for it, there is no need for a comma. You just basically flipped the two different parts of your complex sentence, and we just had to reword it because remember, we're not going to automatically introduce a pronoun without first introducing the noun it's going to replace. So that's why when I did the flip, I said Carla missed the bus after she ran for it because I'm not going to say she. Who is she? Well, Carla. What is it? The bus. So we introduce the noun first before we bring in pronouns. When it comes to complex sentences in the comma, folks, remember, if your dependent clause starts the sentence followed by independent clause, make sure you use the comma. But of course, there's going to be a reason when you will need a comma, even if your dependent clause is at the end, which means even when the independent comes first and then the dependent, like we see down here, there are reasons why you're still going to have that comma. So it reads up here, when a subordinate clause or the dependent clause is at the end of a sentence, which begins with although, though, or even though, you need to put a comma before it. So when you see these different words, this one is a phrase, but when you see although, though, even though, you need to put a comma before it, which goes against this rule because you see down here, if your independent clause comes before the dependent clause, you don't worry about the comma. But folks, once again, you use although, though, even though, you need the comma. Let's look at our example. The school board did not concede to the teachers' demands, even though the public supported the teachers. Even though is one of the words, or I should say phrase, and so we need to make sure that we insert that comma before that dependent clause. And if you're like, well, how do you know it's a dependent clause? Well, just read that and then think to yourself, do I need to be told more information to understand the idea they're trying to get across in this sentence? Even though the public supported the teachers, right? You should be scratching your head wondering, well, what happened? Even though they supported them, something was going to happen. This is a dependent clause, folks, which means that it needs to be attached to an independent clause in order to turn into a complex sentence and be acceptable when it comes to the RLA exam. And it needs to be acceptable when it comes to the extended writing response if you decide to write using complex sentences. So on the screen, what I want to share with you is that how you can go from having simple sentences like we see up here to creating compound sentences by including that coordinating conjunction. Remember, it has to be a logical one. Or you can turn those simple sentences into complex sentences by introducing a subordinating conjunction. So we went from Carla ran for the bus, period. She missed it, to Carla ran for the bus, but she missed it. Or although Carla ran for the bus, she missed it. So, folks, as I mentioned earlier, you need to make sure to know how not only to create simple sentences, but also how to create compound sentences and complex sentences. And that's because of the extended writing response. You also need to know how to edit these types of sentences, which means that you need to know what your coordinating conjunctions are, your fanboys, and the relationship that they show. Because remember, you can't just use any one of them. It has to be the coordinating conjunction that, when added to the sentences, makes sense. So it has to have a logical reason for being chosen. Or you can create that complex sentence by including a subordinating conjunction. And once again, it has to make sense logically for you to practice. So choose the correct sentence. Make sure you read all of them. You have 40 seconds before I reveal the answer. Time's up, folks. And I hope you selected A as the correct answer. So all of them are written the same, except the comma is placed differently here in A, here in B, here in C, and D doesn't even have a comma. So why is A correct? Well, we have a dependent clause after the bell rang. We have our comma after that, which is correct. And then we have the independent clause. Marcus went to the library. So after the bell rang, comma, Marcus went to the library is a complex sentence. After is my subordinating conjunction, folks. And you're not going to want to memorize all of them, but you're going to definitely want to be familiar with the subordinating conjunctions. So when you do see it start off a sentence, you know that that sentence is a dependent clause. But why isn't B, C, or D correct? Well, let's look at B. After the bell, then comma, rang. Well, that is a grammar sin right there. You are separating the noun from its verb. So that is why B is incorrect. Let's look at C. After the bell rang, Marcus went to the library. Where is my comma in between my noun and its verb? That's the same grammar sin that we just saw up here in B. So C is out. Let's look at D. After the bell rang, Marcus went to the library. What's wrong is that we have a dependent clause leading the sentence, where is my comma, to separate them. If D was flipped and it read, Marcus went to the library after the bell rang, you wouldn't need that comma. But because the subordinate clause is starting off that sentence, the dependent is coming first, I need to make sure that comma is there. So the answer A, after the bell rang, comma, Marcus went to the library is the correct choice. Here is another practice sentence. You have 40 seconds, folks, before I share the answer. So time is up, and I hope you selected B. B reads, Maria ate her lunch after the customer left the store. And if you're like, whoa, wait, there's no comma. I thought it was D. Well, let's look at D. Maria ate her lunch, comma, after the customer left the store. Well, we know after is a subordinating clause, which means that this second part that we see, the after the customer left the store, is dependent. And we know that when the independent sentence begins the sentence followed by the dependent clause, we don't need that comma, except for those three words that we had looked at. They were the exception. Well, after isn't one of those words, so we don't need that comma. That's why B, Maria ate her lunch after the customer left the store, is perfectly good. It is that correct answer we're looking for. And if you're like, well, why not A? We don't choose A as the correct choice, not necessarily because they used yet. Yet could actually work if we were bringing two simple sentences together, two independent clauses. But we're not. We have after the customer left the store. This is still a dependent clause. So you don't want to bring together a independent clause and a dependent clause with a coordinating conjunction. We need to bring them together using the correct subordinating conjunction. And if it needs to include a comma because of the rules, then that's when we use it. But A is not correct because we're not bringing them together using a coordinating conjunction. We don't have two independent clauses. We have an independent and a dependent. C is incorrect because the sin, folks, that grammar sin, do not separate your noun from its verb. Thanks for watching the video, folks, where we talked about simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. Folks, it's not only important for you to know how to write these types of sentences when it comes to the extended writing response portion of the RLA exam, but you need to understand these types of sentences, what makes the sentence a simple sentence, a compound sentence, a complex sentence, because when it comes to the multiple choice section of the exam, they might give you a paragraph with a few sentences that need to be edited because they are breaking one of the rules that goes along with the type of sentence that it is. Once again, folks, please make sure that you are not only learning the information, learning the skills, but you are also practicing. It is pointless for you to learn these things, folks, and then not think you have to practice. If you don't practice, by the time the exam shows up, you're not going to know what to do. So always make sure that you are practicing, and you can find free information online. You can find free, no cost to you, practice worksheets to make sure that not only do you know these skills, but you're using the skills as well. You know what you're doing, folks. You've got this. Keep your head up. And I always say, folks, please make sure you are using technology wisely to help you study for the exam. So as you can see, I came back up, I pulled up Google, and I'm searching types of sentences, GED. Make sure you add GED to the end of your searches, folks, because this will help narrow down the response that it gives you in order for it to give you information you need to know. So like always, Google will give us an AI overview, and it's going to tell us the different types of sentences. And we already know this, folks. We've just reviewed them: simple, compound, complex. And I'm going to click show more for here, and it'll give me information about the sentence structures. All of the things that we just learned in this video, it's going to share here, and it'll give me an example. So definitely want to make sure you are paying attention to using technology wisely to help you study. And like most of you know, what do I like to do? I'm going to click on the downward arrow for more, and I'm going to come to books. And so, what these different companies have done is that they have allowed Google to give you a preview of the information that they have in their books in order for you to just get a grasp of, hey, if you were to actually purchase this book, this is the type of information that you would see. And don't forget, folks, Khan Academy offers a lot at no additional cost to you. So I went ahead and for Google, I searched Khan Academy types of sentences. And of course, the first link that they're going to give you is to the Khan Academy video or the lesson where they share information about the different types of sentences.